Hello everyone, welcome back to Story Time. We are currently reading The Willigrews by Terry Tarbox. He's a local author and he has very kindly let us read his stories for Story Time. So we are now on chapter 4. So sit down, get comfortable and let's enjoy The Willigrews. The Willigrews and the Glue Puds. This story is about how the Willigrews came under attack from a band of really horrible creatures called the Glue Puds. The Glue Puds' leader was Graham the Grotesque, who was so ugly he couldn't even wash his own face. All the Glue Puds looked pretty strange. In fact, the uglier they were, the more popular they were among the other Glue Puds, which is why Graham was their leader. Their motto was, "Punching, kicking, biting, we are always fighting." I don't know about you, but I think that's not a good motto. As you may well know, the Willigrews don't like fighting much and they avoid it where possible. The Glue Puds were the complete opposite. They lived to fight and loved attacking each other. They loved attacking other villages and being very unfriendly in general. This is how it all happened. Bromley and Yill were sitting outside their house enjoying a nice cup of chickweed tea and talking about this and that. Bromley was talking about this and Yill was talking about that. As this wasn't very interesting, they decided to concentrate on that, and Yill said, "What's that? In the distance?" "That," replied Bromley, "is a plume of smoke." Sure enough, in the distance, beyond the trees, was a long, skinny tower of white smoke, spiralling into the sky. "What do you think is happening?" asked Yill. "I don't know, but it's happening outside Willigrew," said Bromley. "If it's still smoking in a little minute, I'll ask someone to go and take a look." Just then, someone came dashing across the field. It was Crowfin, and he looked very agitated and confused, as usual. "Fire! Fire!" he exclaimed. "The world is on fire! We're all going to die in our socks!" "Calm down," said Yill soothingly. "You're not wearing socks." Crowfin looked down at his feet, smiled and said, "Phew, that's a relief." Bromley stood up and put his hand on Crowfin's shoulder. "Don't worry, old friend," he said reassuringly. "We'll send a search party to find out where the smoke is coming from." "Oh, can I come?" asked Crowfin. "I love parties." Yill explained to Crowfin that a search party was not a get-together with jelly and ice cream, but was more like a posse. "I like cats as well," said Crowfin. Bromley and Yill gave up trying to explain and started to make plans. Bromley wondered whom he should send, as it might be a dangerous mission. He would send Crowfin, of course. Crowfin was his left-hand man and always went on missions whether he understood what was going on or not. Bromley knew his faithful Longstint would not let him down, and his son Roosin was very reliable. He would also send two of Longstint's best soldiers, Partiv and Parslino. The Willigrew army was not all that interested in fighting, but these two looked like they might be, at a pinch. The chosen group gathered at the meeting hall and awaited their instructions from Bromley. "Right," he began. "This mission may or may not be dangerous, but I need you all to be very careful. The fire in the distance may be nothing to worry about, but I think we should take a look." "I have a question," said Crowfin. "Where is the distance? I've never been there before. Who lives there?" Everyone laughed and rolled about on the floor. "Don't worry," said Longstint. "I know the way." Bromley then said to Longstint, "Don't, whatever you do, put anyone in danger. Just take a look and report back to me." The little band of Willigrews set off straight away and headed towards the distant smoke. They soon reached the edge of Willigrew, where a small crowd had gathered to wish them luck, carrying banners saying, "We wish you luck." They waved goodbye and Longstint and his band marched off. After a while, the Willigrews came to a clearing in the wood, but nothing happened there. I just thought I'd let you know. Nothing happened at the next clearing either. But when they got to the clearing after the next clearing, something did happen. Oh, of course you want to know what that was. Well, At first, it looked like a crowd of feet standing in a circle. But when the group got closer, they could see it was a crowd of feet standing in a circle. When the feet saw the Willigrews approaching, they started to run around in circles, saying, "What's afoot?" and "Upon my soul," and "My corns are playing me up." Longstint walked over to the nearest foot and held out his hand in friendship. "Hello, Foot. My name is Longstint, and we are from the Willigrew tribe. We mean you no harm. We are going to see what the distant smoke is." "That'll be the glue puds," said the first Foot. "You don't want to get involved with them. They're very nasty." Longstint was confused, as the Foot had no mouth, but was speaking to him. He thought it would be rude to ask where his mouth was, however, so he didn't. The first Foot continued, "The glue puds are all ugly, all spiteful, and all have bad table manners. Be sure to steer clear of the one called Farter the Fragrant. He is one seriously smelly dude. Their leader is Graham the Grotesque, the ugliest thing you will ever see, unless you've seen something uglier, although I'm sure you haven't." The Willigrews all shuddered in alarm. The first Foot went on, "We feet like to think the best of people, but in the case of the glue puds, we can't. They just want to argue and fight all the time. They have destroyed every village in their path, so you have a choice. You can leave your village until they have gone, or you can stand and fight. If you fight, you will definitely lose." He paused. "Unless you win, of course, but you won't. Well, you might. No, I'm sure you won't." There was a short silence. It was standing next to a tall silence, which everyone ignored. "We must stop them from reaching Willigrew," said Crowfin. "How?" asked Roosin. "I think we should go and take a look," Longstint replied. "That would be very dangerous," the second Foot warned. "We tried talking to them, but they threw their breakfast at us, eggs and bacon flying everywhere. We ran away before they started throwing hash browns. Look, I've still got brown sauce on my big toe." Everyone looked at the second Foot, and they could all see that it definitely had a big toe, and it really did have brown sauce on it. Having seen this, the Willigrews knew the feet could be trusted. Everyone knows that anyone who tells the truth about brown sauce is trustworthy. There is nothing worse than a brown sauce liar. The Willigrews waved goodbye to the feet. The feet waggled their toes in reply, and continued their journey towards the smoke. The little band of Willigrews trudged on and left the feet heading in the other direction. Their journey took them through a forest with very tall trees and very long grass. There was nothing short about this forest. The Willigrews walked in silence for a while until Partiv broke the silence. He was always breaking things. "I wonder how far the distance is," he asked. "The distance is always a long way away," replied Longstint. "Even when we get there, it will still be a long way away." Crowfin was feeling very confused and felt a headache coming on. Eventually, the band reached a sign which read, "Warning, glue puds ahead. Danger, low-flying toast." The Willigrews could now smell the smoke from the fire, so they proceeded with caution. Longstint went ahead of the others to take a look. He reached a clearing in the forest and, being careful not to be seen himself, he saw the glue puds for the first time. They were all sitting on the grass, talking and laughing, and they were chanting, "We chased the feet and they all got beaten." There was one glue pud who sat alone, some distance away from the rest. Longstint guessed that this was Farter the Fragrant, the whiffy one. A smelly haze surrounded the unfortunate Farter. The next thing Longstint noticed was how ugly they all were. The ugliest of them all was sitting in the middle of the group. That must be Graham the Grotesque, thought Longstint. Graham's face was frightening, with a huge mouth and horrible crooked yellow and black teeth. His nose was like a small hairy button, and his eyes sat on the top of his head on stalks. As he laughed, his whole body, which was really just a big blob of fat, wobbled and rippled. If he had legs, you couldn't see them, as they were hidden under the rolls of rippling fat. Graham stood up to speak, and all the others fell silent. He began in a gruff, rough voice. "We will soon be arriving at another village, and I want you all to be prepared to be very nasty to everybody who lives there. The village is called Willigrews, and the creatures that live there are very ugly indeed. They are a peace-loving lot, so we should soon overpower them and pillage their village." The rest of the Gloophuds leapt to their feet and began chanting, "Pillage the village! Pillage the village!" Some even shouted, "You Willigrews, we'll eat your shoes!" I told you they were nasty. Having heard all this, Longstint left to report back to the others. He told them what he had heard and that things were looking very dodgy. "Many dangers lie ahead," he warned. "We must return to Willigrews and tell Bromgley about the Gloophuds. He'll know what to do." The others agreed and headed grimly back home. As they walked, Parslino, who did not normally say much, came up with an idea. "I've come up with an idea," he said. "Why don't we send a plant?" "That's a good idea," said Crowfin. "I've got a lovely potted geranium on my mantelpiece at home." Longstint smiled patiently and said, "I think Parslino meant we should send a spy to find out more about the Gloophuds and their plans." They all agreed that this would be a very dangerous mission and that nobody should be ordered to go. "I suggested it," said Parslino firmly. "I should go." "Hold up a minute," cried Partiv. "Parslino will never fool the Gloophuds. He's not ugly enough." "Don't you mean not ugly at all?" said Parslino, feeling a bit hurt. Partiv apologised. "Then we will have to make him look ugly with a disguise," said Longstint. "First of all, we must cover up his green fur, or it will stand out like, well, green fur," suggested Crowfin. "What about some wet mud?" They all agreed that this was a good idea and started collecting wet mud from a nearby pond. They set about daubing the mud all over Parslino's body. The mud was a bit smelly, but it did the trick, and not a bit of green fur could be seen. The next problem was how to make Parslino's face ugly. He couldn't stand the thought of mud on his face, so that was out of the question. They carried on searching until Partiv found a fairly huge leaf. We can make a mark from this fairly large leaf by cutting holes for his eyes," he said enthusiastically. After making the holes, Parslino tried the mask on. It was an amazing transformation. His face now looked like a fairly large leaf with 2 holes cut out of it. Just then, Crowfin came out of the bushes with a dead toad in his hand and slapped it on Parslino's head. "Finishing touch or what?" he exclaimed. "If that isn't a fashion statement, I don't know what is." They all agreed with Crowfin. So Parslino, complete with dead toad, headed bravely back towards the Gloophuds' camp, while the rest returned to Willigrews to see Bromgley and tell him about the plan. Bromgley was not too happy about leaving Parslino to face the Gloophuds alone, but agreed that it was a good plan. "Let's hope it works and he gets back safely," he said. "We must send someone to keep an eye on him, just in case he needs backup. Any volunteers?" Without hesitation, Partiv raised his hand. "I'll go," he said. "Parslino is my best mate. I'll leave right away." Bromgley agreed and started to make plans to defend the village against any attack by the Gloophuds. Meanwhile, back at the Gloophuds' camp, Parslino approached with Caution. Caution decided to hide behind a tree, so after that Parslino carried on alone. He walked bravely towards the fire where all the creatures were sitting. "Hello," he said, trying to sound confident. "My name's Terence the Tetchy, and I'm here to apply for membership of the Gloophuds." The first to respond was one called Nosedrip the Nasty. He looked a bit like Graham, but had a really long nose that twisted and turned, and it was dripping constantly. It didn't seem to worry him as much, but it made Parslino feel a bit queasy. "My name is Nosedrip the Nasty," said Nosedrip. "I'm the Gloophuds Human Resources Manager." Parslino could see how he'd got his first name, but surprisingly, Nosedrip had quite a posh voice and seemed very polite for someone called Nasty. "Good morning, Terence," Nosedrip went on. "I'll get you an application form. Have you bought your curriculum vitae?" Parslino looked puzzled. "Curriculum what?" he asked. "Your curriculum vitae," replied Nosedrip. Your resume. Oh, my resume, said Parsleyno in a fake realisation. You should have said, sorry, I left both my Coolacan Vito and my resume at home. Oh, that's all right, said Nosedrip. I often forget things. Why, once I forgot to forget something and remembered it. Nosedrip handed Parsleyno an application form and he started to fill it in. The first question was easy. What is your name? He entered his new name, Terence the Tetchy. The next question was a bit more difficult. What is your address? Well, Parsleyno's address was foot of ash tree, big twig sticking out of window, Willigrews. He couldn't put that down. Parsleyno had to think on his feet, although he was sitting down, and very cleverly he wrote, homeless wanderer. The third question was, are you a nasty piece of work? He answered, yes, I can get very tetchy. In answer to the next question, what are your parents' names? He wrote, Mum and Dad. The last question was, are you a team player? Parsleyno answered, definitely, especially when I'm on my own. He signed his new name at the bottom of the form and handed it back to Nosedrip. Nosedrip scanned the form, looked at Parsleyno and said, that all seems in order. I have pleasure in offering you a position with the glue pods. Your main duties will be to be as tetchy as you can at all times. Next came the introductions. The rest of the glue pods were sitting in a circle, except Farter the Fragrant. They eyed Parsleyno with suspicion. The first to be introduced was the leader, Graham the Grotesque. He shook Parsleyno's hand so vigorously that the little Willigrew thought his dead toad would fall off. Right, pay attention, said Graham tersely. I will not repeat any of these names. He introduced Parsleyno to None the Wiser first, explaining that he was the brains of the outfit. He doesn't know a lot, but he knows twice as much as those who only know half as much as he does. None the Wiser had a normal blob of fat body, but sported a selection of noses on his face. Parsleyno thought it would be rude to count them, so he didn't. Sitting next to None the Wiser was a really small glue pod, and Graham introduced him as None the Less. This little fellow was a very small copy of None the Wiser, but without the noses. He just had one. The next was a really strange-looking creature whose name was Ningle the Knobbly. He had knobbles all over his face and body, and on top of all these knobbles were more knobbles. Knobbly or what? Thought Parsleyno. Parsleyno heard the next glue pod before he saw him. There was almighty burp, so loud that the ground shook. He was introduced as Burp the Belcher. He burped again, though not so loudly this time. Parsleyno waited for him to say pardon, but he didn't. In appearance, Burp had all the characteristics of the others, but had one large knobble on the top of his head. Parsleyno had wondered if he'd caught it from Neagle, but didn't like to ask. Victoria Sponge was next. To Parsleyno she looked almost normal compared to the others. Her skin was smooth, she had pretty eyes and a nice smile. She too had knobbles, but these were matching and were on each side of her face. OK, so they had hair on them, but it had been permed recently with lowlights. The other glue pods, however, considered her to be a bit ugly. I'm bored now, complained Graham. You can get to know the rest later. Now, tell us about yourself. I'm Terence the Tetchy, Parsleyno began. I've been wandering around the forest for a very long time, looking for a tribe that doesn't think I'm ugly. Ugly? Shouted Victoria. Ugly? I think you're very beautiful, and I just love the dead toad. It's a nice touch, and so you. The other glue pods agreed and shouted, hear, hear. Burp joined in with a loud burp, and no pardon. And Farter, well, he farted. All the others quickly put pegs on their noses. These looked as if they had been individually designed for each different nose. Victoria, who was a bit of a fashion victim, wore a designer peg with diamante-encrusted nostril blockers. Nobody offered Parsleyno a peg because they didn't think he had a nose, as it was hidden beneath his fairly large leaf. So Parsleyno had to put up with the terrible niff. It was so strong he nearly passed out. Neagle the Knobbly scratched one of his knobbles and said, Fancy a bit of grub, Terence? It's nearly dinner time. I am a bit peckish, Parsleyno replied, wondering what sort of food the glue pods ate. I hope you like lard, Terence, Neagle inquired. We love it, and if we don't eat plenty of the fatty white stuff, our bodies will shrivel up and waste away. Nigel handed Parsleino a plate upon which was a large chunk of white, greasy lard. Get stuck in, he urged. That'll put hairs on your knobbly bits. Parsleino picked up the lard and took a nibble. It was disgusting and made him feel sick, but he knew he had to pretend to like it, so he chomped away. The Glue-Puds were suitably impressed and started to eat. This was a horrible sight, and their table manners were awful. I did warn you. They were slurping and smacking their lips, and bits of lard were flying everywhere. Even when it started to rain quite heavily, they carried on with their sickly munching. Suddenly, to Parsleino's dismay, they all started pointing at his body. The rain had started to wash away his mud disguise. "He's not a Glue-Pud," cried Graham. "He's all green and furry, just like one of those Willigrews. And that looks like a fairly large leaf on his face. Get him!" All the Glue-Puds started growling and heading towards our little friend, who gulped in fear. Just then the dead toad came to life. It had just been asleep, and jumped from Parsleino's head straight into the crowd of angry Glue-Puds. What happened next was most unexpected. All the Glue-Puds started to run around, trying to catch the unfortunate toad. "Yummo! A delicious toad for supper! Let me at it!" shouted none the wiser. "What a delicacy! A nice fat toad!" Parsleino saw his chance to escape and started to run away. His flight was ignored at first, but just as he reached the edge of the forest, someone shouted, "You can hide, but you can't run. We'll see you at first light tomorrow, and we'll destroy your village." Parsleino didn't look back, but just kept running as fast as his little furry legs would take him. Through the forest he went, dodging round trees, jumping over streams, and occasionally hopping up and down on the spot in panic. Exhausted, he stopped for a rest. Up ahead, he could hear someone whistling a tune. He was a bit wary until he realised it was his friend Partiv. The two little Willigrews hugged each other and did the Willigrue dance, hopping around backwards, flicking their earlobes. They were so happy to see each other. "What happened?" asked Partiv. "Well," replied Parsleino excitedly, "the disguise worked. Then it didn't. It rained and washed the mud off. The dead toad wasn't and jumped off. The Glue-Puds noticed I was green, so I had it away on my toes, but not necessarily in that order." "Well, I never did," said Partiv, although he wasn't really sure if he had done, but he knew he might do one day. Then the two little green fellows headed back to Willigrue to report to Bromgley. They found Bromgley and Yill waiting at the border. They looked very concerned, but were relieved to see their friends back safe and sound. Bromgley had announced a meeting and had invited every Willigrue to attend. The meeting hall was too small to hold everyone, so it was decided to have the meeting in the open air. A huge crowd gathered at the appointed time, and Bromgley stood on a large stone and started his speech. "My dear friends and fellow Willigrews, as you all know by now, Willigrue is under serious threat of attack from the nasty Glue-Puds. Under normal circumstances, I would arrange a meeting with their leader to negotiate peace, but these Glue-Puds are not interested in that sort of thing, so we must prepare to defend our village." Bromgley paused while a murmur of alarm ran round the crowd. "We all know that we will not be able to fight them off," he continued, "as we are not armed with offensive weapons. We must think of a way of outwitting them. Any ideas?" There was general mutterings from the audience. "Hide under a bush," one said. "Run away, or stand still and hope they don't notice us," said another. "Blow raspberries at them," someone suggested. The first to actually raise a hand was Longstint. It was Zamborina's hand. Zamborina said, "I think we should try to frighten them off by making them think we're well armed. We could draw pictures of guns and tanks and hairy spiders and things and place them around the borders of Willigrue." This seemed to find favour with the other Willigrews, and there was a ripple of applause, which ended in a crescendo of clapping and cheering. Some even did the Willigrue dance by hopping around on one leg and flicking their earlobes. Crowfin was next to speak. "Right, everyone, let's get organised. You three over there, come here, and keep still. You six, stay where you are until further notice. The rest of you, move over to the bushes, and then go back to where you were." Then he said, "Sorted," and rubbed his hands together in satisfaction. Bromgley smiled and thanked Crowfin for his suggestion, then said, I would like you all to split up into groups and each make a scary weapon to frighten off the glue puds. Groups, shouted Crowfin enthusiastically. Can my group be Westlife? Everybody laughed and rolled about on the floor, bumping into each other. The Willigrews then split into little groups and set about drawing pictures of weapons that they thought would be most scary. They all had different ideas about which weapons to draw. Some decided to draw tanks. Some drew pictures of fierce-looking warriors carrying bows and arrows. Some drew big, hairy spiders, one with its tongue sticking out. Crowfin drew an alarm clock. Well, he said, my alarm clock always scares me when it goes off in the morning. When the pictures were done, it was late evening. The Willigrews decided to stay up all night to await the glue puds' dawn attack. They all sat around chatting and singing songs. While they sat and spoke and sang, Partiv sat alone looking thoughtful. Bromley saw this and sat beside him. What's up, Partiv, old green furry chap? Bromley asked. Well, replied Partiv, I was wondering why the glue puds are so ugly and we Willigrews are so beautiful. I'll try to explain, said Bromley. I agree with you that Willigrews are beautiful, but only really to other Willigrews. I mean, a bristly old warthog thinks he is beautiful, and if he saw us, he would probably think we were really ugly. The glue puds are beautiful to each other glue puds because they love each other. If you really love someone, how can they possibly be ugly? After all, really beautiful creatures can do very ugly things, and really ugly people can do beautiful things. I think it's important not to judge them on how they look, but rather on what they do. Partiv thought for a moment and then nodded and said, Fair play. It was a long night for the Willigrews as they waited for the dawn. Some slept where they sat and some, like Longstint, kept guard in case the glue puds decided to launch a night attack. All the drawings were in place around the border and everyone agreed they were very scary. The drawings idea was, of course, Plan A, but Bromley was worried that there was no Plan B. He knew that he had to have another plan in case the drawings did not work, but he just could not think of one until a strange thing happened. As Bromley sat thinking, he heard a noise from a nearby bush. Psst! It went. Then, psst! A bit louder. At first, he thought it was someone deflating a beach ball, but then he saw a small figure step out from behind the bush. He did not know at the time, but this was Victoria Sponge, one of the glue puds that Parslino had met. Hello, she said. I'm Victoria Sponge of the glue puds. He knew now. She explained to Bromley that she had made this dangerous visit to help the Willigrews. She was tired of attacking villages and wanted to settle down and become a fashion model. I'm fed up with getting my hair messed up in all these attacks, she said. In my last one, I broke 3 fingernails and my perm came out in the last battle. Bromley was astonished to see a glue pud in Willigrew. I'm astonished to see a glue pud in Willigrew, he exclaimed. See, I told you so. It's very kind of you, he said, but how can you help us? Well, Victoria began, we glue puds have a weakness. We're not very fond of gherkins. In fact, they terrify us, and if you were to fire them at us when we attack, we would soon retreat. Bromley's eyes lit up at this idea. I hope you appreciate my help, said Victoria. Oh yes, that goes without saying, said Bromley happily. Victoria did not answer. She had gone without saying. Bromley hurried over to the rest of the Willigrews. He was grateful for Victoria's information, but wondered if this could really be a trick to catch the Willigrews off guard. Still, as he had not thought of any other plan, he decided to take a chance. The Willigrews gathered round their leader and listened with interest. Bromley began, I've had a visit from a glue pud, and she has given me some information that might help us save our village. The answer to our problem, apparently, is gherkins. Gherkins? Everyone chorused. They all looked at each other blankly. Well, that's what she said. Bromley was now feeling a bit silly. Where will we get gherkins at this time of night? Asked Jill. I know, Crowfin replied. There's a shop just a short walk away called Gherkins Galore. It's open all night to catch the tourist trade. I'll go if you like. All agreed that Crowfin should go to the shop and get as many gherkins as he could. When he arrived at Gherkins Galore, he noticed the owner standing behind the counter. He was wearing a T-shirt that said, I am the owner, printed on it. So Crowfin was a bit confused and wondered whether he was the owner of the shop or the owner of the T-shirt. He greeted Crowfin cheerily. Crowfin could not help but notice that this creature looked a bit like a gherkin himself. He was fairly skinny, fairly green, and if you met him in a jar, you could quite easily mistake him for a large gherkin. He explained later to Crowfin that his tribe were called the Gurloms, and were a cross between a gherkin and a lom, whatever that is. "Good day, sir," he said. "How can I help you on this fine night?" "I'd like to purchase some gherkins, please," answered Crowfin. "Well," said the owner, "you've come to the right place. What sort of gherkins would you like? We stock regular gherkins, organic gherkins, non-organic gherkins, gherkins we're not too sure about, gherkins we're absolutely certain about, cheese and onion flavoured gherkins, salt and vinegar flavoured gherkins, gherkin flavoured gherkins, pomegranate and pumpkin flavoured gherkins. They're very popular with my Gurlom tribe. Short gherkins, long gherkins, thin gherkins, chubby gherkins. Gherkins which have fallen on the floor and are covered in dirt and hairs. And what's more, all our gherkins are pickled in the finest, pickling stuff." Crowfin's eyes had crossed during this recital, and when the owner paused for breath, he just stared at him for a moment. Suddenly, Crowfin jumped to attention. "Wow, that's quite a choice. I thought a gherkin was just a gherkin. What would you advise?" "Well," replied the Gurlom, "it depends what you want them for. If you want to eat them with fish, I'd go for the cheese and onion flavour, a perfect complement. Or perhaps, as you're a Willigrew, you would eat them with chickweed, in which case I'd go for the organic gherkins, which in my opinion are yummalicious." Crowfin looked a bit confused. "I really wanted them to frighten off the glue puds," he explained. "Well, why didn't you say?" said the owner. "You want our special anti-glue pud gherkins. They're a bit expensive though. You see, they're farmed in the foothills of the high and pointy mountains, which are a long way away, so the transport costs are high, and of course we have to think of our carbon footprint, don't we?" Crowfin looked down at his feet. "How did you make a carbon footprint?" He pretended to understand, though, and ordered 3 dozen jars of the special gherkins. The Gurlom lent Crowfin a small trolley in which to carry the gherkins home, and he waved goodbye and trundled off in the general direction of Willigrew. The trolley had 2 sticking wheels on one side, and Crowfin walked around in circles for a while until he got the hang of it. It was a dark and lonely journey back home, but eventually Crowfin arrived back an hour before dawn. All the Willigrews welcomed him back and gathered around to inspect the gherkins. "Oh, look, gherkins," said one. "Yes, they're definitely gherkins," said another. Parslino said, "I know a gherkin when I see one, and they're certainly gherkins." "Now," said Bromgley quite loudly, "how are we going to fire them at the glue puds?" Someone suggested throwing them really hard, but they all decided they couldn't throw them far enough. Someone else suggested firing them from a catapult, but they worked out that the gherkins were too large to fit in one. "I know," shouted Vectorn from the back of the crowd. Remember her? She was the leader of the Scracks and had been called Matcher before they discovered that the Scracks were really just grubby Willigrews. Now she and Bromgley took it in turns to be leader. "Let's make a doggerpolt." "What's a doggerpolt?" asked Yill. "It's like a catapult, but much bigger," explained Vectorn. So the Willigrew carpenters, Spokeshave and Nutspinner, set about the task of making the doggerpolt, with gusto, and some tools, of course. When they had finished, everybody was impressed. It was made from 2 pieces of a tree trunk, hammered into the ground, with a large elastic band attached between them. It was decided that Longstint would take charge of the weapon, because he was strong for a Willigrew. He appointed Partiv and Parslino to help him by loading the gherkins for him to fire. It was almost dawn, and the Willigrews could see the glue puds gathering on the hill to the north. There were about 100 of them, and they looked ugly even from a distance. They stood threateningly in a long line and linked arms, all except one who stood somewhere from the others, linking his own arms. The Willigrews guessed this lonely figure must be Farter the Fragrant. "Listen carefully," said Bromgley, so they all listened carefully, and sure enough they could hear a distant drumming sound. The glue puds were stamping their feet. This sounded really scary, and some of the Willigrews became very frightened. Bromgley walked to the front of his tribe, raised his hands in the air and said, "Stay firm, brave Willigrews. I know you are afraid, but we must defend our village. I know you don't like fighting, but sometimes a Willigrew has to do what a Willigrew has to do. Remember, we have the scary pictures, and if they don't work, we have the gherkins." "What if they don't work? Will they eat our ears?" asked a very nervous member of the crowd who had a blanket over his head. Bromley stood straight and tall and looked down at the little blanket-covered creature and said firmly, "Don't ask, mate. I haven't got a plan, see? And don't worry about your ears. Have you ever tasted a Willigrews ear?" As they stood and waited for the onslaught, Yill tried to calm them by singing a little song which went something like this. Be calm, little Willigrews, be brave and strong. The glue pods are coming, and they won't be long. They're ugly and nasty, and smelly and rough. And we know that Willigrews are not very tough. But we have been clever, so stand firm and still. If the drawings don't stop them, the gherkins will. Don't let the noises frighten you. Let me see no tears. When all this is over, we'll still have our ears. Then, in the distance, a shout went up. Charge! The Willigrews watched in horror as the glue pods galomped down the hill, led by Graham the Grotesque. They were gathering speed and would soon see the drawings. The Willigrews held their breath and waited. As the attackers approached the drawings, they slowed down to a walk. Graham raised his hand and they all stopped. "Wait," he said. "They look well armed. I didn't expect that." "We may as well go back then," said Victoria Sponge. The Willigrews heard this and hoped for the best. However, their hopes were shattered when one of the drawings started to fall over. It tilted quite slowly at first, but then fell faster and went crashing to the ground. "It's a trick!" screamed Graham at the top of his voice. He had a pretty tall voice. "They're just drawings! Let's get 'em! They can't fool us with facsimiles!" Bromley saw this and stood in the front of his troops. "Steady the Willigrews," he urged. "Load up the gherkins and prepare to fire." Partive handed Longstint a gherkin in a flash. Longstint put the flash on the floor and loaded the gherkin into the doggerpult. "Ready, aim, fire! Let's slip the gherkins of war." Longstint heaved the elastic band back, his little muscles bulging with the effort, and let the gherkin fly. There was a whooshing sound as it travelled swiftly through the air above the heads of the crowd. They all watched as it whizzed towards the enemy and crashed in among them. "They've got a vegetable gun," someone shouted. "At least we'll have something to eat to celebrate our victory." The gherkin landed on the ground and the glue pods gathered round it. "Hang on a minute. That's not just a vegetable. It's a cucumis anguria." "A gherkin!" yelled none the wiser. As the knobbly green vegetable started to waft its vinegary smell upwards, the glue pods panicked. They started running about in circles, shouting, "Run for your life, it's a gherkin!" and "Ah, we have a vegetable emergency!" and "Flee the evil Wallies!" Longstint saw what was happening and started to load more gherkins into the doggerpult. "Fire at will!" ordered Bromley. "Which one's Will?" asked Crowfin. Once he got used to the weapon, Longstint managed to fire more and more gherkins towards the enemy. They were now in a blind panic, and the Willigrews cheered when they saw a crowd of them legging it back up the hill. Farter the Fragrant was legging it on his own, as even in a blind panic the smell was too strong for the others. The Willigrews all gathered around Bromley and started to cheer and clap. Some of them hugged Longstint. Everyone was so relieved that the glue pods had gone, especially as the solution had not involved violence, only gherkins. As you know, Willigrews don't do violence. When all things quietened down a little, when things had quietened down a little, everyone heard a small voice coming from beneath a small blanket, which was hiding behind a bush. "Is it safe to come out yet?" said the blanket. "Only it's getting a bit hot in here." Bromley told the blanket that it was okay to come out, and then a head appeared with eyes blinking in the daylight. Everyone recognised Rebeccah, whose name meant not the bravest Willigrew. He had his hands clasped firmly over his ears. "Have they gone?" he asked. "Are my ears safe?" None of the Willigrews laughed at Rebeccah, because they all understood that he was afraid, and they loved him anyway. Then Yill said, "This calls for a celebration. Break out the boogaloo chickweed and the chickweed champagne and let's party. She started the Willigrew National Dance by hopping around on one leg and flicking her earlobes. Everyone joined in and danced around, bumping into each other, which they really enjoyed. As far as our little green furry friends were concerned, bumping was the best. As for the glue puds, I would like to say that they never returned to trouble the Willigrews again. So I will. They never returned to trouble the Willigrews again. There, I said it. I feel much better now. There we go. So that was another chapter of the Willigrews, and we will be back again soon with some more from Willigrew. So we will see you soon. Bye-bye.